when Diane Strand, as chief, started organizing to create what's now the Daku Cultural Center, I got hired on as the person to locate photographs for all of the panels throughout the building. So I spent a year doing that, which was fascinating. Then once the center opened up, I've now been the heritage interpreter since 2012. So for the past 7 years. So the last time I think it was like a major ice dam was from around 1700 to the late 1800s. And so over 150 years, all those lakes. Now there's only about 6 or 7 lakes in the whole of the Yukon that flow south. And they all flow into that Tatshenshini-Alsek system. So there's Suckelman, Ajac, Desdiash, Kathleen, Mush, Bates, Clue Lake, Pine Lake. That's essentially it. So just over to the east of us, there's a tiny little hill over here, and that's the Continental Divide. And every other lake in the Yukon flows north through the Yukon River system. And so only those lakes were stopped from flowing south when that fish stop glacier surged. And of course, you know, there was a massive lake in what's now Haines Junction, or Dakwakata in southern Shoshone. And you know, we have a memory of people setting gopher snares. So gopher snare, the traditional one made out of a split eagle feather and some babiche and sinew and some wood, because it's the first fresh meat in the spring. The hides are highly prized in making those gopher blankets. And because of the difficulty, when people actually saw the river rising and this lake forming, they actually had to run around. There's a common memory of people running around and grabbing all their gopher snares as this lake began. So after 150 or so years of this water, of this lake building up, glaciologists and geologists can tell by the marks in the sides of the mountains from this rushing water that it emptied in about 48 hours. The kind of climate change that's happening right now, the one that the scientists say is human-caused, the big ones here are permafrost that's melting out. And, you know, the term permafrost means permanent frost. So it's been there for millennia. And it's melting out at an incredible rate now. So people talk about in the Yukon only having 2 seasons. There's winter and road construction season. But the road construction season isn't the entire road. It's just these areas that are being affected by this permafrost. So they have to redo them all the time. They'll finish it, they'll work on it for weeks, they'll grade it, they'll put the chip seal down, and then immediately by the next summer, as soon as it's frozen and thawed, you'll see these big dips again. So it's very difficult terrain and climate to deal with. And then the other really big one, for me anyway, which is one of the few that actually has some benefits to the research that I do as a historian with Champagne-Ajac, are the ice patches melting out. And they're not actually snow patches, because the snow doesn't melt out, it gets packed out and they become ice patches. They've been here for at least 10,000 years. The good thing about having these ice patches is over the past 10,000 years, these herds of caribou that used to roam in these areas, like caribou where we said that you couldn't even see the side of the mountain for the amount of caribou that were on them. But in the summers, they would go to the tops of these mountains, stand on these ice patches, these massive sheets of ice. If you're a hunter, you go where the animals are, and that's where they're at their most available, is standing on these ice patches. There's no protection from trees, so we would sneak up there on them. People hunted at regularly for thousands of years as part of their Shakat, as part of their summer round. You know, so the good thing about that, for archaeology reasons, is that if I shoot an arrow here, where we are right now, in Champagne, and I miss an animal and I can't find it, the arrow is made of organic material that we can carbon date as to how old the tool is. But of course, if I shot it here and missed the animal and lost it, within 80 to 100 years, everything would be gone except for the arrowhead. And of course, you can't carbon date the arrowhead as a tool only how long it's been a stone. And so these artifacts, you know, because they're in the ice, they've been preserved. Everything's been preserved. So we can carbon date them. We found over 250 artifacts since 1997. The oldest one is dated around 9,300 years old. We found a moccasin that was just a ball of hide, but of course when they separated it, they found it was incomplete. So someone ran out of their moccasin while they were chasing an animal or for whatever reason, and it got encased in the ice and it's been preserved. That was about probably 3,000 years old. So just it's a real gain for us coming from something that is actually probably not very good for the whole planet, but for our archaeology purposes, it's been very helpful for us. Now, of course, there's tons of other examples. The fact that the climate is getting warmer here, so moose just started showing up 300 years ago. So, you know, one of the main things that people talk about when you talk about Yukon First Nations is how much our lives were affected by moose. You know, we wear moose hide clothing. All our tools are made from moose bones. You know, there's so many uses for moose that, you know, it's a very critical element in our existence. And yet 300 years ago, there weren't any moose here. They moved north just like the deer are moving now. So certainly the Earth has always had these different shifts in temperature and climate, and just having devastating years, some years super hot years. But the thing is, today it's virtually all the scientists that aren't being paid by fossil fuel producing companies that all say that humans are now accelerating. And certainly you can see that in ice core samples. You can take an ice core sample and go back 30,000 years and see the waves of temperature as they change. But the spike that's occurring now has never been seen in 30,000 years. The one that started between 1850 and 1900. This climate is warm enough for deer to be here. So we're getting an influx of deer that have moved north, getting an influx of cougars. Another example are these white spruce trees. But as you can see, many of them are dead. And the reason for that is the spruce bark beetle. The spruce bark beetle has always been here. Well, as far as we know, it's always been here because there has been a certain amount of dead trees. But because of climate change, their numbers are exploding. So essentially, we've been told that what you need is about 2 weeks, like 10 days to 2 weeks of minus 40 in the winter time. And that controls the population. It doesn't kill them off, but it kills off enough of them that it doesn't do much damage. And then we had about 10 or 15 years of not getting that cold. The population exploded, the spring started earlier, the falls ended later, so normally where they jump to one tree and they kill that tree, they're now being able to do more than one jump and killing more trees. And one of the effects of that is the last sort of desperate defense of a spruce tree is to try and force them out by creating sap. The sap burns at a much higher BTU than the wood does. So you have all of these dead trees just soaked in sap. And of course, it's just waiting for a wildfire to come through and take everything out. There's lots of signs of climate change here. And of course, it's not caused by us. There's not enough population in the Yukon for us to be causing climate change. But because climate change is global, we feel the effects from the rest of the planet that is producing too much CO2.